Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. Now, financial freedom and independence can be achieved by diligently implementing proven strategies and tactics that will get you there. But if you don't have the right beliefs about money, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to be successful. I discussed money mindsets in episode 34 through 36, but thought it was time to discuss it again. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with personal finance coach Derrick Kinney, who has some great ideas, thoughts, and stories about having good money beliefs and how to get past the bad ones. So I have back on the show today Derrick Kinney, the CEO and driving force behind the company Good Money Framework. We discussed how to teach your kids about money back in episode 130, but I wanted to talk to him today about a topic I discussed way back in episode 34, which is having the right money mindset. He talks to his clients quite a bit about money beliefs that are the key to your wealth, so I thought that would be the perfect person to talk to about this again after another 130 episodes have gone by or so. So welcome back to the show, Derrick.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation together today.
Yeah. So there are lots of things that you can do strategically and tactically to achieve financial freedom, but wouldn't you agree that having the right beliefs about money has to come first before you can be successful with any of those strategies or tactics, right?
Oh, I agree. It's important for people to ask themselves and press pause sometimes in their lives and just say, why do I feel the way that I do? And I think a bigger question to ask yourself is at this point in your life, whether you're 20 or you're 80, wherever you are in life as you listen to this, are you happy with where you're at right now? Or are there parts of your life, emotionally, relationally, financially, where you say, you know what, I don't feel like I'm at my full potential? And if so, you're not alone. Most people feel the same way. That's the starting off point to say, you know what, just because today I feel like this doesn't mean I have to continue this same feeling tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. And when you say, I hear this a lot, because when it comes to investing and saving for retirement, the earlier you start, the better. But a lot of 20 somethings are saying, look, I'm barely paying the bills here. I've got student loans. I've got this, that, and the other thing. I really can't afford to put money aside towards retirement. I can't start right now. Would you say that that's sort of a money mindset that's holding people back?
Oh, I think it is. And I think that is a mentality that often says, you know what, one day when I have money, then I will save more money. Or, they'll say, Derek, one day when I make even more money or get that promotion, then I'll start to give money away. And what we know is, and research backs this up, Steve, that what you do with little is the same as what you'll do with more of it. It's sort of like if you build a house and there's this hairline crack in the foundation that you don't give much thought to, and you think, you know what, that's not going to matter. But over time, as more weight gets put on it and more people come in that house, that hairline fracture becomes bigger and bigger. It can cause some major problems. And so we know, and even psychologists tell us that, if you make a lot of money and you haven't been good at managing when you didn't have much of it, you're typically going to blow it pretty quickly. And we see this with lottery winners all the time.
Mhm. Yeah, they don't have the right mindset about money, how it's spent, everything else, and how to hang on to it. And really, the irony of the whole thing is that, well, I'm in my 20s, I really don't have much money or any money to invest in retirement, but actually, $50 a month invested in your 20s probably does better for you than waiting till your 30s to invest 200 a month because of the growth potential over time, right? The earlier you start, the more growth that $50 a month has between now and when you retire, right?
Well, that's
So,
exactly right. And yeah, and I'll tell you a quick story, and it's actually illustrating the opposite of what you just said of how waiting too long can actually cost you money.
mhm.
There was a morning I went into my office a couple years ago and I was going to catch up on a Saturday morning. I saw my voicemail light blinking and I pressed the button to listen to the voicemail, and there was a frantic woman's voice on the other end of the line. And she said, Derek, you've got to call me back. Something I've done is going to put me in jail. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And so I called her right back, and she began to tell me a story that she had written a check and didn't move money from savings to checking to cover it. And she got a letter in the mail that said non-sufficient funds. They were going to charge her $100. And she said, now they're going to send me to jail. I said, okay, time out. I understand the non-sufficient funds. Heck, I've written a hot check myself and not known it in the past. That it's a common thing we all do. But why do you think you're going to go to jail? So she then goes back all the way in her childhood and tells me a story about when she was 7 years old. She overheard her dad receive a phone call from a store owner who he had just bought school supplies for her and her siblings. And he had accidentally bounced a check. And the store manager said, because you bounced this check, I'm sending the cops to your house and they're going to haul you off to jail. So, as a 7-year-old girl, she grew up thinking that if you bounce a check, you go to jail, or you make any type of financial miscue, you're going to go to jail. And so here she's 55 years old in a panic, thinking that because she heard her dad receive that message, she was going to go to jail as well. So the point there was she came in the office about a week later, and this began to unravel an amazing story, Steve, because up to this point, I couldn't figure out why she was not taking on risk with her investments. It was costing her tens of thousands of dollars of gains. She always complained about not getting paid what she was worth. And she always talked about the person above her didn't do any better of a job that she could have done. And so she was always distraught about why wasn't she getting promoted. It was the mentality she had that was holding her back, that if I make any mistake, I can't be the best version of myself. Here's what happened. Here's the redemption of this story. Within 6 months, she got the promotion that she'd wanted. She got a $20,000 raise, and she began investing based on what I was telling her to do. And she started making more money. So all of that came from one question. But I suspect that here she was 55 years old. She's heard that when she was 7. I bet there's a lot of people listening that if you're honest with yourselves, you might have a similar belief that has held you back, that when you recognize it and realize, oh my gosh, how foolish I've been, but it's made perfect sense up till now, you can literally redefine what your financial future looks like.
And that's a perfect tie-in to what we talked about when you're on the show before, which is teaching your kids about money. Here's a
Yes.
lesson that this woman learned when she was 7 years old that stuck with her and got her in such a panic later on in life because she had the wrong mindset. So if these sorts of experiences and knowledge and things stick with you since childhood, teaching your kids the right things about money are going to get them started and have them doing much better by the time they become an adult.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the lessons I learned during COVID, when we had our whole family here, we have 4 kids, and we would go around the dinner table at night. And a lot of families do this. They talk about, hey, what was your high of the day? What was your low of the day? That kind of thing. And when it came to dad, I would say, oh, my day was fine, no big deal. And so people kind of glossed over it. And what I realized was those were moments that I could really instill a learning moment in my kids. And so occasionally I would come down the stairs, I office out of my house, and I would say to them, you know what? I really made a mistake today. I lost quite a bit of money on an investment that I picked. They were like, what? Dad, you lost a couple $1,000s? And you could hear like the kids are like, oh my gosh, dad made a mistake. This is going to be really, really good. And what I learned is those are good moments to share mistakes that
Mm-hmm.
we as parents have made with our kids. So many times we're taught by culture to don't look weak, that if you admit mistakes, then you're going to look like a failure to your kids. And why would they want to follow your example because of your mistakes? And what I've learned is the opposite of that, is that by sharing the mistakes we make, it humanizes us as people and as parents. And our kids grow up thinking like, oh yeah, mom and dad are real. They actually made mistakes, but they told us about it. That way, when they get to be our age, they're not facing the same things, as it's not on this replay loop. They can learn from those mistakes and achieve success a lot quicker.
So that to go to that point, it sounds to me, first we were talking about this belief that you can't start investing now, you can't afford to start investing because you're just starting out, you're in your 20s, and we learn to pay yourself first, which we'll circle back to. But it's interesting. Would you say that one of the negative money attitudes or mindsets that people have is that they're afraid of the market, because they're afraid of making a mistake. If I buy a stock or I invest in this mutual fund, it's going to go down. I'm going to lose money. I'm going to have to file bankruptcy, that sort of thing. So, in maybe with your kids, as you talked with your family about a mistake you made, sort of remove that fear of making a mistake. That, all right, you're going to make mistakes, but here's how you can learn from them. Here's how you can minimize the chance of your making a mistake, which will keep people from holding themselves back from investing and saving for the future.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another story, Steve. I had a couple in the office a couple years back, and the reason they came in was that he was a gambler. He would buy penny stocks and really take high risks on his money. And he had been on a hot streak, had done really, really well. And he took all of the money and put it down on one particular investment and lost almost half the value. And up until this point, his wife had fully trusted him, knew what was going on, but he lost faith in himself that, oh my gosh, I've lost half of my money, but he also lost more than half of his confidence. And what we
Mhm.
talked about going forward was, listen, this is a moment where you can learn from, but not panic and run from it. And
Mhm.
we talk through, what if you make another good decision? What could that lead to? What if you make another bad decision? And so we began to restructure how he made his investment decisions, because the worst thing he could do was cower back and not take risk at all, because then he was sentencing himself to the mistake that he made and the penalty that came with that. Instead, he could use that as an educational opportunity, an expensive one at that, but an educational moment. And going forward, then he and his wife agreed to talk about decisions before they implemented. They talked about the pros, the cons, what would be the worst case scenario, and also what could be the best case scenario. And it allowed them to move forward in a healthy way. And they actually began to make quite a bit more money because they were on the same page now.
Mhm.
But the bottom line is they learned from the mistake, they understood the mistake and the pain it felt, but they decided to keep pressing forward, knowing that you're going to run over some potholes on the highway to success.
So, what would you recommend? I mean, people that have this fear, oh, I'm going to make a mistake, I'm going to lose a lot of money. What do you recommend to people to help get them over that fear, to get them past it and say, look, I understand your fear. You're worried about this. If you do this, that, and the other thing, you're less likely to make a mistake. And if you do, here's how you learn from it.
Well, part of it is knowing yourself. And there's a couple of things to think about here. If you listen to some of the heavy duty motivational speakers out there, they might tell you, act like you're already a millionaire and just make decisions as though you have plenty of money. Most people really can't allow themselves to think like that. If they're worried about making ends meet, it's hard to jump to the extent of, I'm going to imagine I'm a millionaire. So instead, what you want to do is, if you're worried about making mistakes, use the half rule. And that means that normally what I would have invested, I'm going to take half of that
Mm.
and put that into an investment I want. And I'm going to keep the other half very safe and conservative.
Mm.
And that, what that does is automatically reduces your risk in half, but at least you're taking half of the action as opposed to taking 100% of none of the action. So
Mm.
that's one mental game that you can play that has been very, very effective with clients to rebuild their confidence, and also realizing too that in order to reach their goals, how strong is their why?
Mm.
And this term is often used a lot of different ways, but for me, it's about really connecting an emotional response to what it is you want. And I'll give you an example. I had a gentleman come in my office, and he really wanted to be by his grandkids. That was his stated goal. His wife had passed years earlier, and so his grandkids were like the target of his total affection. Well, his son and daughter-in-law moved from Texas to North Carolina, and he had a decision to make. He had a really good paying job, very secure job here in Texas, but he knew with the grandkids in North Carolina, he would have to make the move to go. And many people have said, Derrick, one day I'm going to move by my grandkids, but a lot of people talk it, but don't walk it. And I will never forget Tim, because Tim actually left his job here in Texas and moved to North Carolina, not with a job all the way in hand, betting on himself that he knew his skills, he was confident, and he knew that by doing the right thing, the right things would be done back to him. He got an even higher paying job
Mhm.
within a couple miles of his grandkids. And so that was an example to me of sometimes you've got to bet on yourself. We talk a lot about what investments do we make and do we gamble and do we take risk and so forth. But sometimes the biggest risk and opportunity is the person you're staring at in the mirror. And that's what Tim did that day. And I think for him, because he bet on himself once, it builds this confidence muscle that, you know what? I flexed that muscle once and it was painful, but it actually worked out pretty good. I'm going to flex it again when I start this business or start this side hustle or ask for the raise I've always wanted to do but didn't feel strong enough to do it. So all those wins layer and stack on themselves and can really lead you to success a lot quicker.
And I would say too, in the past 20, 30 years or so, a lot of products have come out into the investment market that can ease that. You talked about the person that had taken a lot of risk, really done well, and then took all the profits and put it in one investment. Certainly, diversification can spread that risk. And now you have things like mutual funds, and not just mutual funds, but index funds that basically track with the market. And since 95% of the time you don't beat the market,
Right.
and over time, despite ups and downs, you still grow, that it's easier to, you don't have to worry about, am I picking the right stock? Am I investing in a winner? You pick a good, stable index fund with a good family of funds like Vanguard or Oppenheimer or many of these investment houses, and that can reduce that fear of making a mistake, right? Because you're spreading out your risk.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in my book, Good Money Revolution, I talk about the four lanes of investing. And lane one, if you've got a four-lane highway in your city, this will resonate very clearly. Lane one is typically that slow lane in the far right-hand side,
Mhm.
and that is representative of your checking and savings accounts. Very, very slow earning if they don't earn much at all, but the money is going to be there when you need it. The worst thing is to put money in something and you want it back out, but
Mhm.
it's not ready to come back out because it's worth about half the value. So checking and savings, very conservative. That next lane is those 3 to 5 year goals. That might be, I want to pay off my credit cards. I want to save for a house down payment, want to save for the big trip, whatever that might be, have enough money to launch a business. That might earn maybe 4 to 6% in that ballpark, but relatively moderate, conservative to moderate, but it's not going to have the wild swings of the market. That third lane, I call that the longer term retirement lane. So here we're talking about your 401k, your 403bs, if you're in a nonprofit, IRAs, et cetera. As you talked about, Steve, that S&P 500, the big blue chip, even if appropriate, annuities, real estate, stocks, bonds, a diversified portfolio that will go up and down, but long term, you're going to be okay. Now, what intrigues me the most, though, is lane four, which is typically the far left lane, and that's the fast lane. Statistically, that's where the most accidents occur, the most speeding tickets get issued, and that's what I call the play account. So here, let's say that you're at a cocktail party or you're with a friend and they say, you know what, I bought this hot stock and you should buy it too. And keep in mind for our listeners, typically by the time a hot stock tip gets to you, it has cooled down dramatically. Rule of thumb. But if there's something that you really have an interest in, maybe it's, crazy stuff, maybe like Bitcoin, Ethereum, a pharmaceutical company, a stock, take a little bit of money and put it there because it gives you a sense of gambling in a very controlled environment.
Mhm.
That way you've got some fun stories to tell your kids and people at cocktail parties. But if it does well, it's going to make the rest of the portfolio look like it was out to lunch. But if it loses it all, you can still retire. So the bottom line is having money in each of those four lanes and monitoring that is the key. And also, one thing I would add, there may be couples listening who one spouse or one partner manages both the long-term investments and the budgeting. And this is something that I learned when my wife and I first got married. I handled the day-to-day and the long-term, but I hated the day-to-day. It was just monotonous. It was tedious. It was too minutia filled. And so one day my wife came to me very nice. She said, Derrick, why don't you let me do this? And what I realized was my wife had this ability to multitask, to juggle all these different expenses in her mind. And our finances went so much better once I gave that part to her. So she had her lane to go fast in. I had my lane to go fast in managing the money.
Mhm.
And if you tend to be someone who wants to overmanage, you can cause yourself to have a crash in those two lanes, which doesn't spell well for your financial success.
So she really stay in your lane, right?
Stay in your lane, which also I find actually leads to a better marriage as well.
Well, you mentioned earlier, the story of the person that wins the lottery and then 2 years later they're broke. Clearly, there's a disconnect there in attitudes towards money. And before you can start talking about paying yourself first and some long-term goals, you have to have the right mindset and attitude about money and how it's spent. Basically, budgeting, having an idea what it costs you to live. Would you say that's fair to say? And a negative mindset that sort of holds people back because they can't hold on to the money in order to invest it?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, it's very important to really take a financial x-ray of your situation 4 times a year. Back when we were in school, we got report cards every 6 weeks that would tell us, here's your citizenship grade, here's your academic grade. And I think as adults, we get away from these measurements because we think, well, that's what the younger people need, or that's what we needed in high school and college. The reality is, top performing companies review their measurables almost every single day. And so if you take away nothing else from Steve and I's time together, I would encourage you to write down on a piece of paper on your phone, hey, what are my assets minus my liabilities right now? And
Mm-hmm.
that's your financial x-ray to see what is my net worth, because ideally you want your net worth growing every single year. And then also you want to write down what are my total expenses, and don't just look at your checking account, also look at your debit card, look at your credit card to see what subscription services you might have tied yourself into. Because one thing that subscription services do, I love them, but they're very smart in the sense they typically give you the first month or two for free. Then you forget you're paying for them, and now you're paying $10 a month for something that you thought you disconnected months ago. I mean, that's how the gym industry has done so well,
Mm-hmm.
because they can build a small facility and sell it 5 times as what could hold it, because they know 1/5 of the people will actually show up to be there. So the bottom line is you've got to make sure that you're running your finances like a business. And
Mm-hmm.
as I jokingly talk about in my book, it's sort of like your dollars without a plan are on break, and they're plotting how to run off and leave you. And you want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you tell every dollar, look, here's where you're going, and even have the plan before you earn the dollar so that once the money comes in, it automatically goes to my giving fund and my saving fund and my debt payoff fund, and here's my fund. All those things are already in place. That way it's automatic. You don't want to have to
Mm-hmm.
rethink your plan every single pay period.
And it gets into paying yourself first, where that money comes in and goes directly to long-term savings or retirement and things like that. So you don't even think about it. The money's already gone as far as what's available. And I know with talking to my bankruptcy clients, and they have to go through this analysis. Unfortunately, it's often too late. But how much money is coming in and how much money is going out? And the number of times I hear, "Oh, good heavens, I had no idea we were spending that much on this." And it's that epiphany, that realization that's important, because it helps you by going through this exercise and seeing what you spend on what you can get rid of, subscription services being one of them, cutting the cord on your cable, whether you're cutting back on your cell phone, but whatever it is, and finding out, look, this is where we can make cuts. You may have thought you didn't have money to invest, but when you start looking at what you're spending and what you can cut back on, you find that there is money, and maybe you get over that hurdle and start investing towards retirement.
Well, I like that. And I'll tell you another story. This was a couple that came into my office and they shared, Derek, we've given this decision a lot of thought. We've decided to sell our house and buy an RV. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big decision. And I quickly said to them, hey, I love your thinking, love your visionary idea. A question for you. Have you ever driven an RV? And they paused for a second. They said, no, we haven't. I said, well, tell you, why don't you do this? Why don't you rent an RV this coming weekend and then take it on a trip? And then let's meet next week just to confirm either you really like it or you don't. So they thought that was a great idea. And I knew what was going to happen, but I wanted them to figure this out themselves. They came back in a week later and they said, Derrick, I'm so glad you said that. You saved us probably $200,000 from selling our house and buying an RV. We didn't even enjoy being in the RV. We thought that we would because their friends had done it, and all of their friends said, you're going to love it. You ought to do this too. But for them, it was exactly the opposite game plan. And so, what I would tell people is before you make drastic decisions in retirement or about to retire, kick the tires. And let me give you a practical way to apply this. One of the questions I often get asked as a financial advisor and as I consult with other financial advisors to help them grow their practices, people ask, Derrick, how can I know how much money I need to be able to retire? There's so many rules of thumb about you need 80% of this or 60% of this, or your expenses will go down. And it just creates even more confusion for people. Here's the proven way that I have found over 25 years that will guarantee people knowing what it will take, and that is to live on a practice retirement budget 3 to 6 months prior to retiring. And the magic of that is while they're still working full time, they have the safety net of their full time jobs. They're now living as though they're retired. So they have the security of the income coming in. Let's say they want to live on $10,000 a month. Well, in the first month, and I have them write down each expense and track it, in most cases, they're within about 10% of what they actually need. But what it does is it forces them to really live on what they say they need. So when they do retire, there's no worry about, I wonder if this is going to last. I wonder if we're going to run out of money. Now they can easily and peacefully, with great freedom, move into retirement knowing that they've already lived on it 6 months prior to retirement. So that system there, if implemented correctly, has helped thousands of people all over the country because it takes the guesswork and the worry and what keeps people awake at night out of the equation so they can really have true peace of mind and retire to something and not just from something.
And get over that negative financial mindset of I can't afford to retire. And
That's
you and
exactly right.
because they don't know, there's this huge unknown. And I mean, my wife and I were approaching retirement fairly quickly, and that's one of the things we're looking at is putting together a retirement budget, just as you say. Okay, she's starting to get models. She's a government worker, so all right, how much am I going to make in my pension 3 years from now? That's this. Figure the taxes, figure what they're going to take out for Medigap insurance, and this is Social Security, and this is what I have in Social Security, and then what are our expenses? And you find out, and while you have the time to plan for it, maybe you'll start when you realize, hey, this is really going to work. You start looking forward to it a lot more, and it's not something you fear, but it's something you look forward to.
Well, and I think that's a key point. And it reminds me of a woman I coached recently. Her name is Debbie, and she worked for a very small engineering firm. And she came to me feeling overworked, overlooked, underappreciated, which many people listening can probably connect with. And the issue was is she felt like she wasn't being paid what she was worth. And the concern was she was about 10 years away from retirement. So she was looking for ways to catch back up. Her kids had already finished school. Now there was a way for her, I call it the sweet spot, where she could kind of catch back up on her retirement savings. And so we talked about what would be some ways to add value in her current role, because we know that most people don't get the money they deserve because they ask for the 4% raise. They ask for the boss, hey, look, my expenses have gone up. I need you to pay me more money. And the reality is, and I've had to learn this myself over many, many years, that every boss's, for that matter, every person's favorite radio station is WIIFM, which is what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And so if you can answer that question, if you can be the rock star on that radio station for people, you will almost always get what you want because you're helping them get what they want. And so she talked about how her boss, who was the owner of this company, always commented about how he had no time because he was servicing all these customers himself and wanted more capacity. So we worked up a game plan where she could get licensed. He could give the bottom 25% of the customers to her to build a relationship, look for new business opportunities, which would then give her boss 25% more capacity to bring in new business. So we worked up this game plan. She scheduled the visit with her boss, and her boss loved it. I mean, Debbie was shocked that her boss was so in favor of this. And basically the boss said a couple things which I think our listeners can take a couple notes from. First of all, he was like, I wish we had more people like you, Debbie, who thought like an entrepreneur inside of an existing company. That
Mhm.
was a big light bulb for her. Second of all, he agreed to reimburse her for getting licensed once she passed. And she negotiated that any new business that she came up with, she would get a bigger percentage of that. And so it was a win win. In other words, the company owner always was making more money because the more that Debbie made, the more that the owner made. And so it was a
Mhm.
win win. Plus, this was the real bonus. We came up with this idea where there was only one salesperson in the company. And so every idea had to go through this person. Debbie pitched the owner of the business to empower and basically monetize and bonus every employee that if they brought a lead in to the sales department and it materialized into sales, then that employee would get a pretty big bonus. And so suddenly now you had this entire team of people who at one time were feeling like they're underpaid, overworked, underappreciated. And now they feel like they're part of this team who, whatever they do, they can make more money. It revolutionized not just Debbie and the business owner, but the entire team. And so, what I would tell people listening right now is, as we face the winds of a recession, you can choose either to cower back or say, you know what, I'm going to be a value adder and stand out and ask myself three questions. In my current job, how can I increase sales? How can I reduce expenses? And how can I help grow this business? And if you can answer those three questions and bring those to your boss and say, look, over the next 3 months, I want to work on these three areas. And if we have success, here's the raise I want to get. Now you've defined the negotiating stakes, which are
Mhm.
so important. So they might say no, but in most cases right now, because it's so hard to find and retain quality people, when an employee comes to you and says, look, I want to help you, owner, grow your business, you're going to say yes, because you're always making more money the more money they're making.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, before we wrap up, I see behind you, you have a stack of your books there, Good Money Revolution. Could you tell us briefly about your book? And I'll leave a link in the show notes. I understand you're offering like the first 5 chapters to get people started on reading it.
Yeah, Steve. So the book is Good Money Revolution. And there's this concept in the world that talks about that money is bad. And if you have a lot of money, you're bad. And I want to tell people right now, I believe that money is perhaps the greatest lever for positive change that we have. And so I want to help empower people to go make more money to do the good they've always wanted to do. And so we want to get this message into as many people's hands as possible. The book has become a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller. We're really proud of that because it's impacting people's lives. But you can go to goodmoneychapters.com and download the first 5 chapters for free. And it's going to give you great content to get you kick-started in this concept of making more money. Because I believe right now, this is the time for people to go make more money to do more good. Go to goodmoneychapters.com.
Absolutely. Well, folks, yeah, definitely look into that. Hey, it's free. Read the first 5 chapters. Obviously, you'll get a lot out of it, and I'm sure getting the book, you'll get a lot more. But just to tie up, like I said, Derrick and I talking about these money mindsets that people have that might be holding them back. Don't feel that you're not ready to start investing. You're in your 20s, you can't invest. Even a little bit of money can get you there on the long term because it has the most time to grow. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. There are a lot of good mutual funds, index funds, things like that to spread out the risk. And remember, if you're in your 20s, you have a good 40 years before you're going to retire. So the ups and downs will definitely work out. And I'm sure there's lots of information in the book about money mindset, how to get over this, how to get a good handle on your money, because you might think you don't have the money to invest when you really do. So thanks for coming on the show again, Derrick, and with some great information about getting the right money mindsets, getting out of the bad ones so you don't hold yourself back from financial freedom.
Thank you, Steve. It was great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.